Okay, let's unpack this. We are embarking on a focused analysis into one of the most transformative figures in global history, Siddhartha Gautama.
Mm.
This religious teacher and wandering ascetic who was active in South Asia during the 6th or 5th century BCE is recognized as the founder of the massive spiritual tradition we know as Buddhism.
Right.
For anyone seeking a foundational understanding of the Dharma, Gautama's life and immediate context are, well, they're the definitive starting point.
And our mandate today is clear. We have to distill the essential knowledge about Gautama's life, his core teachings, and his historical context directly from the foundational source material.
Which is easier said than done.
Well, exactly. We need to navigate the fact that we're dealing with a profound synthesis, a blend of, verified historical anchors and the rich, extensive traditional biography that matured over centuries.
So the goal is to understand how that narrative evolved.
Yes, while remaining firmly rooted in the earliest textual and archaeological evidence we can find.
The initial identity is rooted in his origin story. Born in Lumbini to royal parents of the Shakya clan. But the tradition and history, it all hinges on his choice to abandon that privileged life.
That renunciation sets the stage for absolutely everything that follows. I mean, the man who's born Siddhartha Gautama spent years undertaking intense spiritual practices
We're talking mendicancy, extreme asceticism.
and rigorous meditation. This pursuit culminated in him achieving nirvana at Bodh Gaya. This profound realization, attaining freedom from the fundamental causes of suffering, ignorance, and craving, that is what bestowed upon him the title Buddha,
Which literally means...
the awakened one.
And the sources we rely on are complex. They cover a significant span of time.
They do. We draw heavily on the primary textual records, primarily the Pali Suttas, which are believed to contain the oldest strata of his teachings.
And there's good reason to believe that, right?
Oh, yes. A scholar like Oscar von Hinüber, for example, points out that the Pali texts often retain these extremely archaic place names and subtle historical details that align perfectly with the 5th century BCE context.
So there's internal evidence.
And then we have essential physical evidence, like the early rock inscriptions, Emperor Ashoka's edicts from the 3rd century BCE, which give us critical external confirmation.
And then much later, we get the full stories.
Right. Later definitive works, such as the Sanskrit epic Buddhakarita by Ejirgo, give us the full, traditional, and highly revered biographical narrative that most people are familiar with.
That transition takes us directly into our second key area, nomenclature. When people approach this figure, the immediate challenge is just the sheer number of names and titles. He wasn't simply the Buddha from birth.
Precisely. And each name provides a specific historical or metaphysical lens. Siddhartha was his personal name, a Sanskrit term which literally translates to he who achieves his goal.
And Gautama.
That was his clan name, meaning descendant of Gautama. Or sometimes it's interpreted as one who has the most light. Together, Siddhartha Gautama identifies the man.
So in the older texts, that's what we see.
Often, yes. In the older textual traditions, particularly in Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia, he's frequently referred to as Gautama Buddha, or sometimes the renunciate Samana Gautama.
And when we use the term Buddha, we're strictly using a functional title.
That is absolutely critical to understand. Buddha is purely a title signifying a realized state. It means awakened one or enlightened one, and it's derived from the Pali root Bud, which implies to wake up or to know.
It's the attainment of Bodhi.
The attainment of Bodhi awakening. But perhaps the most profound and self-referential term he used in the Pali canon was Tathagata.
Tathagata. Now, this is notoriously difficult to translate. What depth does that term carry?
It's very deep. The term translates roughly as one who has thus gone, or one who has thus come. Its profound ambiguity signifies a being whose essential nature is beyond the limitations of conditioned reality.
So by using it, he's making a statement about his own nature.
He is. By calling himself Tathagata, he asserts he is beyond all transitory phenomena, beyond all conditioned coming and going. The texts even state that a Tathagata is immeasurable, unfathomable, and inscrutable.
Meaning he can't be grasped through normal concepts.
Exactly. Not through concepts tied to the physical world. It subtly lays the groundwork for the more cosmic interpretations of his being that we will definitely discuss later on.
For those looking for solid historical confirmation, we really rely heavily on the title Shakyamuni.
Shakyamuni, the sage of the Shakyas, is arguably our strongest historical anchor.
And why is that?
Because this specific title appears on Emperor Ashoka's famed Lumbini pillar inscription, which dates to circa 250 BCE. That inscription marks the site of his birth and is one of the oldest surviving written records mentioning him by any title, directly linking the historical figure to his clan identity.
In the canonical texts, those names are almost always accompanied by an exhaustive list of epithets that describe his spiritual stature.
Yes, and the list is meant to provide a complete picture of his perfected qualities. The texts frequently cite terms like Bhagavato or the Blessed One, often paired with Tathagata.
There are others too.
Many others. There is Samasambuddho, signifying perfectly self-awakened, which means he attained awakening without relying on any teacher. Others include Araham, worthy of homage, implying he is completely free from defilements, and Vijakarana Sampanno.
What does that one mean?
It means endowed with higher knowledge and ideal conduct. The sheer volume of these epithets establishes him not just as a teacher, but as a being of supreme moral and spiritual attainment.
Okay, let's pivot to the timeline, because for listeners trying to place him historically, the dating is genuinely confusing. There are no contemporary written records.
No, not at all.
So we're dealing with two competing chronologies.
We are, and it's a critical scholarly problem. We have to rely on two traditional systems. The long chronology, which was widely accepted for centuries, places his death 218 years before Ashoka's coronation,
Which gives us a lifespan of...
roughly 566 to 486 BCE. But then there's the short chronology, which places his death only about 100 years before Ashoka's coronation, yielding a much later lifespan, around 448 to 368 BCE.
Why do modern scholars tend to lean towards the short chronology, or at least a date closer to it?
The preference really stems from external validation provided by Greek sources regarding the Mauryan Empire. Scholars have a relatively firm date for Ashoka's reign based on his correspondences with Hellenistic rulers, which are documented in Greek records.
So we're using outside data to calibrate the Buddhist timeline.
That's the idea. If we trust the traditional Buddhist sources that link Ashoka's coronation to the Buddha's parinirvana, then aligning that with the Hellenistic dates compels us to move the Buddha's death closer to the 400s BCE.
So the scholarly consensus today attempts a middle ground that accommodates these external anchors.
Exactly. The consensus often aims for his death somewhere around 410 BCE. This range allows him to be reliably established as a contemporary of crucial historical figures mentioned in the texts,
Like King Bimbisara of Magadha.
and also Mahavira, the Tirthankara of Jainism. Establishing these contemporaries is vital, as the development of Buddhism is partly defined by its interaction and debate with these other philosophical movements.
And while the dates are flexible, the archaeological record confirms the general time frame and the truth of certain places mentioned in the narratives.
The archaeology is absolutely essential for grounding the tradition. The relic stupa of Vaishali, for instance, in Bihar, is considered the earliest archaeologically known stupa.
What makes it so significant?
Its core structure predates the 3rd century BCE Mauryan expansions, which aligns perfectly with the early tradition that the Buddha's relics were distributed among 8 clans shortly after his death. The later redistribution of these relics by Ashoka, which is mentioned in tradition, also aligns with the archaeological observation that the relics at Vaishali were removed and then replaced.
What about the physical site of his birth? That seems like a pretty important one to pin down.
It is. The site of Lumbini, now in modern Nepal, is confirmed not only by Ashoka's pillar, but also by recent excavations. A small wooden shrine was found there, and it was dated, potentially, to the 6th century BCE.
That's very early.
It is. And the structure contained traces of tree roots, which may point to the pre-Buddhist practice of tree veneration among the Shakyas, perhaps indicating the sacred grove where he was born. This physical evidence really solidifies the geographical and cultural context of his early life.
Transitioning to our third area, let's explore that cultural context, the socio-political environment of Greater Magadha. We can't view him as emerging from the heartland of established Hindu Vedic culture.
No, that distinction is paramount. The Shakya clan resided on the geographical and cultural periphery of the eastern Indian subcontinent in the 5th century BCE.
Near the Himalayas.
Right near the foothills. And their structure was likely an oligarchy or a republic where his father, Suddhodana, functioned as an elected chief or raja rather than a hereditary, divinely sanctioned king.
And crucially, they were seen as outsiders by the Brahmanic establishment.
Yes, critically. Brahmanic texts often categorize the Shakyas as non-Vedic, placing them in the region that scholar Johannes Bronkhorst termed Greater Magadha.
What were the key characteristics of the religious life of the Shakyas? How did they diverge from the Vedic norms?
Well, the Shakyas had distinct indigenous practices. They revered sacred trees and groves, and they worshipped local spirits like the Yakshas tree spirits and Nagas, which were serpent beings.
Which connects to the Bodhi tree later on.
It's a powerful echo, isn't it?
Yeah.
The extraordinary significance placed on the Bodhi tree in the Buddhist tradition, the very location of his awakening, is a direct continuation of this earlier non-Vedic Shakya veneration. This regional culture was just very receptive to non-Brahmanical religious expression, which paved the way for the Buddha's teachings.
And this cultural environment was experiencing massive intellectual ferment, the Shraman movement.
The Shravana movement defined the age. The term Shraman means one who exerts himself, for spiritual purposes. These were renunciate traditions, including Jainism, Ajivika, and Ajnana, that flourished alongside the dominant, ritual-focused Vedic Brahmanism.
So the Buddha was not operating in a vacuum.
Not at all. He was one of many influential thinkers, constantly engaging in debate with adherents of these other schools. These are often referred to in texts like the Brahmajala Sutta, which actually catalogs 62 such philosophical views.
Was the Buddha's movement fundamentally a reaction against Brahmanism?
It was more complex than a simple reaction. It was more a rigorous reform within the broader Shramana tradition.
And what's the key difference?
While Brahmanism focused on ritual, lineage, and the authority of the Vedas, the Shramana schools emphasized individual effort, ascetic discipline, and immediate liberation through ethical and psychological transformation.
And his own teachers were part of this.
Exactly. Even the Buddha's two early, pivotal teachers, Aracha Kalama and Udraka Ramaputta, who practiced these sophisticated meditative dhyanas, were part of this wider renunciate movement. It confirms that the Buddha was learning from and then refining existing practices.
This philosophical shift also coincided with major societal upheaval.
Absolutely. The rise of Buddhism occurred during the second urbanization of the Ganges Basin. As new cities grew, old tribal structures dissolved, and new forms of trade and commerce emerged.
Creating an urban environment where caste was less relevant.
Less immediately relevant than, say, economic success or moral behavior. Both Buddhism and Jainism found enormous success in these urban centers precisely because they opposed the Brahmanical emphasis on birth and caste hierarchy.
So his message was perfectly timed.
Perfectly timed. His egalitarian message offered a path based on merit and moral action that resonated very strongly with the mercantile class and urban populations.
Let's turn now to the core narrative, our fourth area of discussion, the transformative journey itself. The sources present different motivations for his renunciation.
They do. The earliest canonical sources, like the Aryapariyas and the Sutta, the Discourse on the Noble Search, they tend to focus on an internal existential motivation.
What was that motivation?
The core insight was the profound realization that life, even a royal life, was inescapably subject to the four universal conditions: birth, aging, sickness, and death. He sought the unconditioned supreme security from bondage, recognizing that the householder life was inherently restrictive and impure.
While the life of the ascetic offered freedom.
The free open air, as the text put it.
But the narrative that sticks with us, the classic story of the motivation, involves the foresights.
That's the traditional, later biographical material, dramatically codified in texts like the Buddha Karita. This version emphasizes that Siddhartha was a sheltered prince, deliberately shielded from all suffering.
And his charioteer, Channa, shows him the world.
Guides him on 4 successive excursions where he witnesses an old man, a sick man, a corpse, and finally a peaceful renunciate. Seeing the reality of suffering, followed by the tranquility of the ascetic, is what shocks him into leaving.
So scholars see this as a later addition.
Generally, yes. It's agreed this narrative was likely adapted from accounts of previous Buddhas to provide a clear, dramatic catalyst for what's called the Great Departure.
The Great Departure itself is marked by enormous sacrifice.
It is the defining moment of renunciation. He leaves his wife, Yashodhara, and his son Rahula while they sleep. He rides out on his horse Kanthaka, crosses the river Anomiya, and there he famously shaves his head and exchanges his royal attire for the simple robes of a mendicant.
He literally sheds his entire previous identity.
Completely, committing fully to the path of seeking ultimate knowledge.
His initial search led him to the most advanced meditative techniques available at the time.
And he was a quick study. He first sought out Aratta Kalama and mastered his teaching, achieving the non-physical meditative state called the sphere of nothingness. This is a profoundly subtle state of mind.
But he wasn't satisfied.
Not at all. So he sought out Udraka Ramaputta and mastered an even more refined state, the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. In both instances, he was offered the position of equal teacher.
And he rejected them. Why?
Because he realized these high states of concentration, while very peaceful, were still conditioned. They were impermanent, and they did not lead to nibbana, to permanent liberation.
After exhausting the limits of meditation, he made a sharp turn toward asceticism.
This was his reaction to the perceived failure of those high states. He reasoned that perhaps radical purification through self-mortification was necessary.
And the text described this in detail.
The Mahasaccaka Sutta details this extreme practice. He drastically reduced his food intake, sometimes surviving on a single grain of rice a day, and practiced severe breath control until he became frighteningly emaciated.
He reached a point of collapse.
He did. His body was so frail that he realized this path was also utterly unproductive. It merely distracted the mind and weakened the body required for the effort.
That moment of physical collapse was the genesis of the middle way.
Precisely. The realization that both the sensual self-indulgence of his youth and the extreme self-mortification of his ascetic phase were equally futile. That led him to define the middle way.
And he accepted food to regain his strength.
An offering of milk and rice pudding from the village girl Sujata. The middle way, philosophically, is the path that avoids the extremes of indulgence and suffering, favoring instead a balanced approach to ethical conduct, mental discipline, and wisdom.
With his strength restored, he returned to meditation, realizing dhyana was the true vehicle.
He sat under the now famous Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, and he was determined not to move until he reached his goal. The process involved achieving the 4 dhyas, progressively deeper states of meditative absorption, characterized by detachment and equanimity.
And these states led to the 3 higher knowledges.
Yes, the Tavijja, the ability to recall countless past lives, the divine eye, which is insight into the karmic destiny of all beings, and finally the ultimate insight, the extinction of all mental intoxicants, the asavas.
The culmination was full awakening, samma sambodhi.
That culmination was the insight into the 4 noble truths, achieving nirvana. This state is not annihilation. It is the extinguishing of the fires of desire, hatred, and delusion.
And the biographical texts frame this as a cosmic battle.
They do. They describe the assaults and temptations launched by Mara, the personification of desire and death, who tried desperately to prevent the Buddha's liberation. Mara attempted violence, temptations, psychological warfare, all of which the Buddha calmly repelled, calling the earth goddess as his witness before completing his awakening.
This triumph brings us to the essence of the teaching, the Dharma, our 5th area of discussion. Now, immediately after awakening, he hesitated to teach. He believed the truth was too profound.
This moment where the deity Brahma Sahampati intervenes and convinces him to teach really underscores the immense subtlety and difficulty of the Dharma. The Buddha felt that beings trapped by desire and greed would simply fail to grasp the truth that all things are conditioned and impermanent.
So Brahma persuaded him,
arguing that there were some beings with little dust in their eyes who would understand. This established the compassionate mission. He would teach those capable of hearing the message. He then traveled to Sarnath to deliver his first sermon to the 5 companions who had previously rejected him.
the entire system is built upon the foundation of dukkha.
Dukkha is the core reality of samsara, the cycle of suffering and rebirth. While it's commonly translated as suffering, that term is often, insufficient.
It's more than just pain.
Much more. It means unsatisfactoriness, unease, or pervasive stress. The sources elaborate that dukkha operates on 3 distinct levels.
What are those 3 levels of dukkha?
Okay, first we have dukkha. This is the suffering of suffering, the obvious pain, grief, sickness, old age, the things we all recognize.
The second is more subtle.
Second is viparinama dukkha, the suffering of change. This is the understanding that even happiness or pleasure is ultimately a form of suffering because it's impermanent. As soon as pleasure ends, anxiety or craving or disappointment arise in its place.
And the third type is the most profound.
That is sankhara dukkha, the suffering of conditioned existence. This is the pervasive unsatisfactoriness of all conditioned phenomena, the realization that everything we cling to is fundamentally unreliable. We suffer not just because we are sick, but because the very processes of our existence, our mind, our body, our thoughts, are unstable and temporary, leading to this inevitable unease.
Realizing that is the beginning of wisdom.
The realization that all life processes are rooted in this instability is absolutely the beginning of wisdom.
The mechanisms of samsara are governed by karma, but the Buddha's definition was revolutionary.
It fundamentally shifted the focus. In the older Vedic context, karma often referred to ritual action and its outcome. The Buddha asserted that karma is primarily mental intention.
He said it outright.
Famously, he stated, "By karma, I mean intention." This is a deeply psychological and ethical move. It means the moral weight of any thought, word, or deed is determined not by the physical act itself, but by the consciousness, the motivation, the intention that drives it.
That distinction has massive practical ethical implications.
It does. Consider two actions: accidentally causing harm versus deliberately causing harm. In the older context, the negative outcome might carry a similar karmic weight. For the Buddha, if the intent was wholesome, driven by non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion, the karmic consequence is radically different, even if the external result is flawed.
It places all the responsibility on the individual's mind.
Exactly. It empowers them to transform their future by purifying their intentions.
To dissect human experience and demonstrate how suffering arises, he introduced analytical frameworks like the five aggregates.
These frameworks break down the illusion of the self. The five aggregates, or skandhas, are form, the physical body. Then feelings present, unpleasant, or neutral. Then perceptions, recognition, labeling.
The mental side of it.
Right. Then you have mental formations, volitional impulses, intentions, habits. And finally, consciousness, the awareness of the other four. The Buddha argued that these are just transient processes, not a solid eternal entity. We experience suffering because we cling to these impermanent aggregates, wrongly identifying them as I or mine.
And the causal mechanism for this suffering is explained by dependent origination, pakkasamuppada. We can't dismiss this as too complex. We really need to understand the basic mechanism.
It is complex, but it is the core intellectual achievement of the Dharma. Dependent origination is the detailed causal explanation. All phenomena arise and exist only dependent upon pre-existing conditioning factors. The basic, concise formula is, it being thus, this comes about.
Can we break down just the initial 3 or 4 links to illustrate how the cycle begins?
Of course. We begin with ignorance, avijja, which is fundamentally not knowing the Four Noble Truths. Conditioned by that ignorance are formations, sankharas, the intentional karmic impulses generated by the mind.
And that leads to awareness.
Yes. Conditioned by formations is consciousness, vinyega, the initial moment of sensory awareness. And conditioned by consciousness is name form, namarupa, which is the integration of mental, name, and physical form processes, essentially the basic components of what we call a person.
And the chain continues from there.
Link by link, explaining how contact leads to feeling, feeling to craving, and craving inevitably to suffering. The entire structure of suffering arises from this chain of conditionality.
And the ultimate philosophical conclusion of all this conditionality is anatta, no self.
This is the most challenging concept for many listeners, and the pinnacle of the Buddha's philosophical departure from earlier Indian traditions. Anatta means there is no unchanging Atman, no permanent soul, no eternal self underlying the five aggregates.
Because everything is a process.
Exactly. Since all mental and physical processes are impermanent, conditioned, and subject to decay, they cannot constitute an eternal self. The person is simply a continuous, complex flow of these causal processes.
If there is no permanent self, how does rebirth function? Who or what moves from one life to the next?
That is the crucial question that distinguishes the Buddhist middle way. The Buddha rejected both eternalism, the belief in a permanent, continuing soul, and annihilationism, the belief that the person is totally destroyed at death.
So what is reborn?
Anatta teaches that what is reborn is the causal flow of karma and consciousness. Think of it like lighting one candle flame from another. The second flame is not the same as the first, but it is directly conditioned by it. There is causal continuity, but no substantial identity.
The person is a process, not a substance.
Precisely. This perspective, rejecting the extremes of permanence and non-existence, defines the true philosophical application of the middle way.
Let's shift our focus now to the social architecture he created, our 6th area, the Sangha.
The Sangha, the community of monks, bhikkhus, and later nuns, bhikkhunis, was established after the first sermon at Sarnath. It provided a structured environment dedicated entirely to the pursuit of the Dharma.
And the rules were strict.
The practical rules governing this life are contained in the Vinaya Pyaka. And yes, this discipline was rigorous. It enforced celibacy, required extremely minimal possessions, just 3 robes, a sewing needle, and a begging bowl, and mandated that the monks rely entirely on the generosity of the lay community for the daily food.
It was a homeless, celibate path.
And that was seen as the fastest route to liberation.
The social structure of the Saya was radical for the time, especially regarding caste.
It was profoundly egalitarian. The Buddha actively and explicitly critiqued the dominant Brahmanical claim that caste status was divinely ordained or based on inherent superiority of birth.
He used logic to refute it.
Not divine revelation, no. In the Vasudha Sutta, he argued that the essential differences among humans are found in their moral actions and their occupations, not in the circumstances of their birth. He concluded, not by birth one is a Brahmin, by moral action one is a Brahmin.
And what was the practical implication of joining the order?
Anyone from any caste, including untouchables, merchants, and Brahmins, was welcome to join the Sangha. However, upon ordination, they immediately renounced all previous caste affiliations. They became simply a monk, a bhikkhu.
A spiritual democracy.
Which stood in stark contrast to the rigidly hierarchical society of Greater Magadha.
How did the Buddha articulate his views on governance and political philosophy?
He held a somewhat deflationary view of political power. While acknowledging its necessity, he taught that political engagement often leads to entanglement, ego inflation, and distracts from the ultimate goal of enlightenment.
But he did have an ideal for a ruler.
He did. He articulated the ideal of the righteous ruler, the Kakavati, or wheel-turning leader.
What defined a righteous ruler in the Dharma?
The Kakavati derived authority not from conquest or birthright, but from moral purity and the promotion of the Dharma. The Kakavati Sihana Sutta emphasizes that the ruler's duty is to ensure protection and, crucially, to provide property and resources to the needy.
And there are consequences for failing to do so.
The text warns that the failure to meet these social duties leads directly to poverty, then theft, and escalating violence. It shows a clear connection between economic inequality and moral decline.
And the Buddha witnessed severe political conflict firsthand, didn't he?
He did. He lived to see the decline of his own clan, the Shakyas, which were eventually conquered and destroyed by King Ajatashattu of Magadha. This provided a painful, real-world contrast to the ideal Kakavati.
So his experience shaped his advice.
It seems so. His experience with rising kingdoms like Magadha, which were centralized and expansionist, led him to promote quasi-republican principles among the smaller states, like the Vajika Confederation, advocating for regular assemblies and communal harmony as keys to sustainability.
And this non-hierarchical quasi-republican principle was implemented in the Saya itself.
Exactly. The structure of the monastic order was deliberately decentralized. All bhikkhus had equal rights to attend open meetings. He specifically refused to appoint a single successor when asked,
insisting the teachings would be the guide.
He insisted that the Dharma, the teaching, and the Vinaya, the discipline, would be the sole teacher for the community after his passing. This was to prevent the corruption of centralized authority.
For the vast majority of people who remain householders, what did the Buddha offer them for happiness in this life?
The Dharma wasn't just for monks. For laypersons, the Buddha offered practical ethical guidance for achieving happiness, or sukha, both immediately and in the next life.
Can you give an example?
The Digajjosutta, for instance, provides clear instructions for worldly success, stressing 4 factors: persistent, skillful effort in one's occupation, protection of wealth, having good friends who are moral and steadfast, and living a life balanced with one's means.
When for long-term benefit.
Long-term happiness and a good rebirth were achieved through cultivating wholesome karma. This involved moral discipline, primarily adhering to the 5 precepts, non-killing, non-stealing, and so on, alongside generosity, dana, faith, and developing rudimentary wisdom. Teachings like the Sigalovadaya Sutta provide detailed, practical ethics for householders on how to properly interact with family, employees, and teachers. It's really a social ethics curriculum.
We move now to our 7th area, the close of his life and the legacy he secured, starting with the complex establishment of the Bhikkhuni order for nuns.
This was a major organizational shift in his later years. His stepmother, Ma Prajapati Gautami, insisted on establishing a parallel order for women. The Buddha initially hesitated.
Why the hesitation?
This hesitation is viewed by scholars not as philosophical misogyny, but as a practical concern regarding the physical dangers that the homeless, wandering life of a shramana posed for women in 5th century BCE India. He feared the stability of the entire organization might be compromised.
How was he persuaded?
His trusted attendant, Ananda, intervened. He asked the Buddha directly if women possessed the same spiritual capacity as men to reach awakening. When the Buddha confirmed that they did, the logical necessity of establishing the order became clear.
So the order was established?
Yes, the Bhikkhuni order was established, though with additional rules known as the Gudharmas, which ensured the senior authority of the bhikkhus.
He also faced direct internal threats to his authority.
The schism, led by his cousin Devadatta, was a very serious challenge. Devadatta was motivated by a desire for leadership and attempted to impose stricter, more severe rules on the Sangha, arguing the Buddha was too lax.
He even tried to have him killed.
When rejected, he actively attempted to murder the Buddha on several occasions, including releasing a rampaging elephant. The texts depict the Buddha countering this threat by sending his chief disciples, Sariputta and Moggallana, to convince Devadatta's followers to return, successfully mending the immediate damage to the community.
The final year of his life is intensely documented in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta.
This text portrays the Buddha's body as struggling with decline. He is described as being old, worn out, feeble, kept going only by being bandaged up. His final illness occurred after consuming an offering, often described as pork or mushrooms, prepared by the blacksmith Kunda.
And the illness was severe.
Violence and severe. Recognizing the profound ethical implications for Kunda, the Buddha specifically instructed Ananda to ensure Kunda understood that the act carried the greatest merit, as it was the Tathagata's final meal.
Before his passing, he addressed the critical issue of succession.
When Ananda emotionally asked him to name a leader, the Buddha explicitly refused, stating, "The Tathagata does not think in such terms. He does not wish to control the Sangha." His instruction was clear. The monks must rely on the Dhamma and the Vinaya as their teacher and guide after he was gone.
To ensure the community's survival was based on doctrine, not personality.
Exactly.
His final words are incredibly powerful and concise.
His very last reported words were, "All sakkaras decay. Strive for the goal with diligence." Sakkaras refers to all conditioned things, all compounded phenomena. He emphasized impermanence and the absolute necessity of persistent, conscious effort, diligence, or appamada to achieve liberation.
And then he passed away.
The sutra records that he then entered the highest states of meditative absorption, the 4 dhyanas and the 4 immaterial attainments, before returning to the 4th dhyana and achieving parinirvana, the complete and final extinguishing of all conditioned existence.
His physical remains immediately became the focus of reverence and community action.
Following traditional rites, his body was cremated, and the remains were distributed as relics among various clans. These relics were then enshrined in massive memorial mounds, or stupas, across North India. This act of enshrining the relics provided the community with physical objects of reverence and solidified the spread of the Dharma.
And it prompted the preservation of his teachings.
Yes. The need to preserve his teachings led to the First Buddhist Council, convened shortly afterward under the leadership of Mahakassapa, to collectively recite and finalize the canonical texts of the Dharma and the Vinaya.
Finally, we turn to our 8th area, the enduring image, looking beyond the historical man to the cosmic figure revered in later traditions.
This transformation is perhaps the most fascinating theological shift. It is most prominent in Mahayana Buddhism. Later scriptures move away from the image of the human teacher who achieved enlightenment under a tree to a cosmic eternal figure.
And the historical Siddhartha Gautama is reinterpreted
as a nirmatakya, or a magically projected emanation body.
So his birth and death are merely teaching tools.
Precisely. In this Mahayana view, his apparent birth, struggle, awakening, and death were calculated, skillful manifestations upaya, designed specifically to guide unenlightened beings who could not grasp an eternal formless truth.
So he didn't really die.
The Lotus Sutra and the Mahaparinirvasa Sutra assert that he did not truly enter parinirvana, but remains eternally active.
And what is his true form in this transcendent understanding?
His true identity is the Dharmakaya, the formless body of ultimate reality, which is eternal, unconditioned, and beyond description. The Trikaya framework, the 3 bodies of the Buddha, the historical Nirmakaya, the celestial Sambhogakaya, or enjoyment body, and the ultimate Dharmakaya firmly establishes him as a being whose compassion and wisdom permeate all worlds, existing outside of time.
This transcendent stature eventually led to his integration into other major world religions.
This is a classic example of syncretism. In India, as Buddhism gradually declined, Gautama was incorporated into Vaishnavism as the 9th avatar of Vishnu. This development is often seen by scholars as an ambiguous political and theological move aimed at absorbing or neutralizing the distinct appeal of Buddhism within the evolving Hindu tradition.
And we find echoes of his story even reaching Abrahamic faiths.
That's correct. The figure of the Christian Saint Josaphat, whose story is documented in medieval texts like Barlaam and Josaphat, is historically derived from the term bodhisattva.
How did that happen?
The transmission occurred via Arabic, where bodhisattva was corrupted into Buddhasav, then into Yudasav, and eventually Josaphat. The entire narrative mirrors the Buddha's life story. the prince shielded from suffering who eventually renounces the world.
What about the Islamic perspective?
Muslim scholars across history were certainly aware of the Buddha, identifying him as Bud or Shakyamuni. Some Muslim scholars, particularly in later centuries, theorized that he was one of the many unmentioned prophets, or Nabi, of Islam.
Is there specific evidence cited for that?
Well, the scholar Muhammad Hamidullah even linked his enlightenment under the fig tree to a specific oath taken in the Quran Surah 95.1, referencing the fig tree suggesting the Buddha might be identifiable with the prophet Dhu-al-Kifli. These cross-religious connections just demonstrate the immense global reach of his influence.
This comprehensive analysis has really highlighted the essential tension presented in the sources. The human skeptical seeker Siddhartha Gautama, the man who struggled intensely with extreme asceticism and achieved profound insight, versus the cosmic perfected ideal that later traditions revered as the eternal, formless Dharmakaya.
And both images define this tradition.
It seems, regardless of which image resonates most strongly, the enduring practical message remains the same.
Absolutely. His final instruction to the Sangha, to rely on the Dharma and the Vinaya, and to strive for the goal with diligence, is the cornerstone. It emphasizes that because all conditioned things decay, the spiritual path requires ceaseless, conscious effort. The power of that simple directive transcends theological complexity.
The framework he established, the Four Noble Truths, the rejection of a permanent self, the centrality of intentional karma, offers a coherent path for liberation.
Which raises an important question for you to contemplate as you process this material. Considering that the scholarly community continues to debate the exact earliest core of the teachings and the precise chronology of his life, do the essential principles of the gradual path and the focus on diligence maintain their coherence and practical power for the individual seeker?
Regardless of when the specific texts were finally codified.
Exactly. The structure he built was designed to rely solely on the truth of the process, not the personality of the teacher.